Hello everyone, my name is Jan. This paper is the result of a collaboration between the George Washington University, University of Maryland, and Tel Aviv University. And yeah, in this presentation I would like to talk about users' safety perceptions of generative AI conversational agents with a particular focus on trust, risk, and fairness perceptions. So generative AI conversational agents are widely available to the public. Maybe many of you have actually already used them today. I definitely use them a lot, also for my work, of course. And we have asked people in our survey, so we had 123 participants in a survey that we conducted, and we asked them, hey, what do you use actually these AI chatbots for? So you can see that about 60% say, well, they use chatbots to answer a question instead of using a search engine. Others use it to have it explain something, or they use it to write text, and so on. So I think we're kind of familiar with these kind of tasks. And of course, when you use AI for these kind of tasks, we maybe have to think about, well, to what extent can we trust these outputs, right? Because we know that many issues exist with these tools and models they use. So one problem maybe is that the output they produce is just simply like false information. So some models maybe don't know who is the president of the US. Other models maybe replicate certain biases, such as gender bias or racial bias. Or some models maybe create some output that, I don't even know how to describe this, but it definitely should raise ethical concerns. So the question really is, how do users perceive these systems, right? Because of course they also know about these issues, either through the media or because they experience it firsthand when they actually use these models and tools. So this is what I call here the question, like, how safe do people think AI is? And when I say safety, or like when we talk about safe AI, we usually use this term under the umbrella of trustworthy AI or responsible AI. And then we usually conceptualize it in terms of trust, fairness, and risk. And so the question is, well, how do users perceive these factors towards these systems? And of course, these factors are very important for us as usable security and privacy researchers, right? Because oftentimes we use them as antecedents in behavioral models because we want to understand, can they predict or correlate with certain behavior that has security and privacy implications for users. At the same time, our community seems to still find a way to actually measure these factors in this AI space, and also human-centered AI researchers have the same struggles. So something where we see in practice is this approach where we just simply ask a single item question, such as, in your opinion, how likely is a chatbot to create potentially harmful output? So I invite you, everyone, now to participate in my very short survey and answer this question. The problem is it's not IRB approved and I don't have time to wait for your answer, but let me take a guess. So maybe some of you say it's more likely, others maybe say it's less likely. At the end of the day, one of the problems is we don't know what risk did you actually think about? Can we actually compare this? Right? Because when we have a latent variable such as perceived risk, there are actually certain subconstructs that we have to take into consideration because people think about these different risks. And this was exactly the objective of this research. So we wanted to find some measurement instruments that allow for these multidimensional measures, and at the same time then use these multidimensional measurements to then analyze differences in people's perceptions. So the first thing we do is we start prototyping measurement instruments. So for trust, we relied on an existing scale that has been used in the past, especially in contexts such as robots and other intelligent systems, and we adapted it to the chatbot context. Then the same for fairness. So there is a scale that's commonly used by the AI community, like the human-centered community on AI aspects, and we adapted it for the first time now for the chatbot context. And then for risk, we really had an issue because there was no real measurement that existed that we could rely on. So we took a taxonomy of risk and some work that focused on toxicity measurements in the past, and then derived some items based on this work. And then, of course, we have to measure something. So we ran a survey with a prolific sample balanced by binary gender with people from the US. So in the study, we first asked participants, hey, can you please explain to us what you use chatbots for? We saw this already in the beginning. How often you use chatbots? What kind of chatbots do you use? Then we asked them all these questions about trust, fairness, and risk. And then we also collected a bunch of demographic data. Unfortunately, I cannot go into details here, but you can ask me questions about it, or you can take a look at the paper. OK, so then the first step was to run exploratory factor analysis, because we wanted to get to these subdimensions, right, these subconstructs. So for trust, we found that we could identify 3 different subdimensions, benevolence, low personal risk, and reliability with decent alpha reliability scores. For fairness, we'll be able to identify 2 subdimensions here for decision-making integrity and politeness with some borderline alpha reliabilities. And for risk, we were able to differentiate between just risk of discrimination, unhelpful or misinformation that the chatbot maybe outputs, and the risk of offensive language. So the next step then is we can calculate some scores based on that, that you can now see here, that we map here as box plot diagrams. So here for perceived trust and all the different subconstructs, then for perceived fairness, and for perceived risk. And what you can already see is there is some variability, right? The responses have some different distribution. And when running statistical tests, we can actually see that all of these are also significantly different. So the subdimensions differ for each of these factors, though we have some smaller effects on the left-hand side and some larger effects here on the right-hand side. OK, so now we can differentiate between different perceptions. So the next step then is, can we also differentiate between maybe different user groups based on these perceptions? So what we did is we ran a latent class analysis, which kind of assigns every participant with a probability that they can be described by a certain response distribution. And we found that there are 3 classes that allow us very good interpretability. So what it means is we can now cluster or group people into different groups. So we had 3 different groups. And then we gave these groups names to make it more tangible. So the first group is called the hesitant skeptics. The second group, we call them the cautious trusters. And the third group, we call them the confident adopters. Now the question is, why do they have these names? And I will explain these names now on the following slides. So first of all, what you can see here at the bottom is now the different clusters or groups with different colors. And now we can map again here these different factors. So here for perceived trust, perceived fairness, and then also perceived risk. And the first thing we can see is that the hesitant skeptics, well, yeah, they are the most skeptical people, so they have the lowest trust, the lowest fairness perceptions, but the highest risk perceptions. Then we have the cautious trusters and the confident adopters, and they seem to share them, like to have similar perceptions for trust and perceived fairness. So we didn't see a difference there. Also, the difference, like the effect was very small. However, they do differ in terms of their risk perceptions. So the cautious trusters have significantly higher risk perceptions compared to the confident adopters who don't see any risk. Now we can also zoom in a little bit, right? So to these subdimensions, and there we can see that actually there's some more overlap going on in these subdimensions. We can also see aspects such as that the confident adopters really don't believe there is a risk at all for offensive language, but maybe a higher risk for misinformation or unhelpful outputs. And we can do similar things then also for these other factors. OK, so now then the last question is, can we actually find differences between these clusters based on the demographic variables? So can we kind of predict the class membership? So what we did is we ran a logistic regression analysis, and we found that, for example, usage frequency was an important factor here with people who use or who reported to use chatbots more than once a week were significantly less likely to be assigned to the hesitant skeptics and significantly more likely to be assigned to the confident adopters with quite large effect sizes. Then also, for example, people who reported to be non-heterosexual were significantly more likely to be assigned to the hesitant skeptics, so those people who were also less likely to use the chatbot more often, but significantly less likely to be assigned to the confident adopters. We also have some other demographic variables, so the hesitant skeptics, they maybe also had a lower income. And what's maybe interesting, we actually found that where there was higher probability, they reported to be of white ethnicity. There are some other papers that also observe this, maybe at first glance, kind of paradox that someone who has a maybe protected property or unprotected property, or is a non-minority is actually more skeptical of these systems than maybe others. And then the confident adopters, we find they have a higher probability of having higher income, reporting to be non-white ethnicity, and also to be younger. All right. So let's come to a summary and conclusions. So what did we learn? Our paper provides a first step forward for measurement instruments that help us to differentiate between certain subdimensions, and we can see that this differentiation can also be very useful to better understand users' perception, and we hope this is going to be useful to use them when we run large-scale studies that use maybe behavioral models. Then further, we can see that we can differentiate between different groups of people based on these perceptions. And it's a bit more complex than just a low, medium, and high risk trustworthiness group, but sometimes they actually share some perceptions. Sometimes there are some differences between these groups. So it's more complex than that. And we can also see that there are some demographic differences. So for example, usage frequency seems to be one important factor here, but of course we cannot make any claims about causation, right? We don't know, maybe people who don't trust these things, they don't use them, or the more they use them, the more they trust them. Maybe it's both, and maybe this is to find out in the future. And with this, thank you very much for your attention. I'm looking forward to questions, and I'm happy to chat about this. I think you can find me. Thank you very much.